Hi, it's Ben Welsh, back here at the LA Times. In this next lesson, I'm going to show you how to filter your data frames down to just the records that you want, not just all the ones that you start with. And this is a common operation that is done in all sorts of data analysis, from in Microsoft Excel, when you get the little pull down and you select a value and filter to just that, or in an SQL database query, if you've ever written one of those with a where statement, where you filter down a data set to just the records you want to keep. I'm going to show you how to do that in Pandas using the data frames that we've already imported into the notebook in our previous lessons. And so if you haven't done that, if you haven't read in the list of campaign committees and contributions yet into Pandas, you need to go back and work in the previous lessons, because I'm going to assume that you have your Jupyter notebook up and running, and that in that notebook you've read in a data frame called props, which includes all of the committees that were active in last November's election, November 2016. Now, the mission I'm going to send us on is to dig into this data to filter down this list, which has over 100 different committees working on 17 ballot measures, to just those committees on a single question. And that question is Proposition 64. Proposition 64 asked California voters last November if they wanted to legalize the sale of marijuana for recreational purposes. Ultimately, they voted yes, and that is becoming the law. It will be legalized here in the state. But before that election, there were a number of committees that spent lots of money both for and against the measure to try to convince people to vote their way. Our mission over the next few lessons is going to be to filter down our data set, which includes all committees on all measures and all contributions to all those committees, to just those committees that were active both for and against Proposition 64, and there was more than one on both sides, and then to just those contributions that went to those committees. And it's by following that path, by filtering down to just the committees that we're interested in, and then focusing in on the contributions to those committees, it's on that path that lots and lots of campaign data analysis is done. And so for our example we're going to work through in this class, that's going to be our first effort, to start off with the list of all those propositions and to filter it down to just those for Proposition 64. So how do we do that? It's not so tough, but we just have to learn another Pandas trick. Now, Pandas does filtering using a system that it calls indexing. And that's where you take your variable that you've created, your data frame props, and then you pass into it an expression that it will evaluate to decide which record should I keep and which record should I exclude. And so in our case, as you may remember in the last lesson, we were working with a column within the props data frame called prop name. And that column included for every record the proposition that that committee was active on, either in support or in opposition. So in the next few minutes, we're going to use this column, prop name, to filter this data frame, props, down to just the ones where that field is filled in with the full name of Proposition 64. And that will do that by writing an expression we pass in. Now that's a lot of talking and a lot of jargon. Let's do it. It's really not that hard, all right? The first thing we need is we need the full name of Proposition 64 so that we can use it in our filter. Where can we get that? There's a couple ways, but one thing I'm going to suggest is that we use our friend that we learned in the last lesson, value counts. Now value counts will take a column from a data frame, and then it will group up all the unique values within it and count how often they are. And so by doing that, it will return everything in the column in a single list. Now hopefully you'll remember how to do this, but if you don't worry, we're going to type it together. We're going to start with our data frame variable, which we named props. We're going to do a dot to access the columns and methods on that data frame. Our column is called prop name. Now again, if I just run this now, it's going to print out that column for every single value in the table. And you can see that in Pandas defaults, it actually truncates those values that are long, as they are in the case of this data, so you don't get the full thing. Well, how can we get the full thing to look at? Our friend value counts. So after prop name, I'm going to do another period, and then value underscore counts, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Again, it's props dot our column name, which is prop name, dot value counts. I had a typo there. Value underscore counts, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Now push the play button. And you can see, even though it's a little difficult to read because the names of these some of these propositions are very long, you can see in here in this list the full name of all those measures. And the third one down is the proposition that we want, Proposition 64. The full name was Proposition 064-marijuana legalization, period, initiative statute, period. And that's just the way that it was named by the state of California in their database, and we're kind of stuck with it unless we were to come up with an alternative. And so we're going to need to use this complete value to filter down to just the records that match. So I'm going to highlight this, and you should do exactly the same. You should highlight that entire string of text, right-click, and then click Copy. Now, we're going to use that to write this expression to do our filter. All right, so I'm going to go down into the next empty box, and I'm going to type the expression first. It's going to take a little more than this ultimately to finish the job, but I just want to show it one step at a time. The expression is as simple as props, which again is our value for our data frame, dot prop underscore name, which is the column we want to test against, space. Now we need to use an operator, which will be basically a symbol that will tell Python the type of comparison we want to do between our column, which is prop name, and our value, which is the full name of prop 64. So in this case, we only want to keep those records that exactly match the full name of this prop. If the value of that row in that column doesn't match prop 64, we want to exclude it. If it does match, we want to keep it. And so to do that in Python, you do two equal signs in a row. Why two equal signs? Well, remember, a single equal sign is used in Python when you're assigning a variable. Like when we did props equals and then read the CSV in, that equal was assigning the thing on the right side to the variable on the left side. And so to distinguish between cases where you're assigning things to variables and cases where you're testing whether two things are equal, Python substitutes in two equal signs. Whenever you see two equal signs in a row, that means that you're going to be testing whether the thing on the left is equal to the thing on the right. So in this case, the thing on the left is our prop name column, and then the thing on the right is in our clipboard. It's the full name of prop 64. So before I paste it in, I'm going to make two empty quotation marks, which is where I'm going to put that value in, because again, this is a string of characters we're comparing against, and in Python, those have to go between either single or double quotes. And then I'm going to right click, and I'm going to paste in that full name. Now I don't want to run the cell just yet because I'm not totally done, but this is just to revisit a basic filter expression of the type that you're going to pass into your data frame to limit it to just the records that match. Now this could be written in hundreds of different combinations. You could test any of your columns by changing what you write here against really any value you wanted by changing what's over here on the right. And then what goes in between is how you're testing it. There's other options here besides equal equal. Things like greater than or less than when you're testing numbers are two things you can do. There's a variety of complex string matching tools you can do to filter to things that partially match or that match certain patterns, and a whole bunch of other ways that you can ultimately filter your data, including chaining multiple filters together to cases where things either are one thing or another thing, or one thing and another thing, or even more complex combinations of filters as you get more sophisticated in what you're trying to do. But since this is our first filter, we're going to keep it really simple. And this simple expression just asks, return only those records where the prop name column equals this exact value. Now there's one last thing we need to do before this will actually work. We need to take this expression and we need to pass it into our data frame, because it's the data frame itself that we want to filter, not the column. And this is what is called indexing in Python language or in Panda terms. You don't need to worry about precisely what that means, but it really comes from the use of a pair of flat brackets after a variable to limit what's inside that variable, right? And it's a tool that's used in Python and other places to say take the first 3 items from a list or the last 3 items from the list. But in this case in Pandas, it can be used to do more complex operations to limit what's in a list or data frame of values. And the way that you do that here is you just start by typing the name of your data frame, which again is props. And then after props, a flat bracket. All right, so it's props, flat bracket, and as odd as it may seem, props.prop name again, right? And so into the flat bracket, or following the flat bracket, we're going to write our complete expression that we want to evaluate against the props data frame. So then that complete expression is then written, and then on the far right-hand side, at the very end, after my quotation, I need to click over and do another flat bracket, which might float kind of over here on the edge of your page, since our line is getting pretty long. And so what we're saying, if we just for a second kind of pull this out so you can see it, is we're creating a flat bracket after the props data frame, and then inside of it, we're putting the expression that we want to use to filter that data frame. And once you've done that, you have your complete line of code, all right? And you're ready to hit the play button. And what you can see is that spit out below you in the panel is a data frame table, much like the one that came out at the top of our page. But if you look closely, you're going to see one key difference. The prop name column for each and every one of these rows begins with prop 64, because this is no longer the complete data table that came out back up at the top here when we first read it in, where you could see the first rows are prop 51, but instead here is a more limited data frame that only has those records that match. Now if we want to do more with this in the future, we're going to need to save it into a variable just like we did up above. And in the same way that we took our line of code and put it on the right of an equal sign with the variable on the left to save it before, we're going to do again. And so the first time around, we called our variable props because it had all the props committees. Now in this case, it's just a single prop and its committees or proposition. And so I'm going to name it prop instead of props, the singular. You could really name it anything you wanted, but that's what I'm going to choose. And if you don't like my name, you can always pick another one. And then a space and then another space. So the code on the right of the equal sign stays exactly the same, but on the left-hand side, we decide we're going to save the result into this new variable prop. I'm going to do that and press play. And now, as has happened before, nothing comes out. That's good. That means that the values have been saved into the prop variable, which we can now inspect. Now, you may remember the 2 techniques we learned before for to inspect a data frame, but just in case you don't remember, let's type them out here again. The first one is prop.head, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, which is going to spit out a little peek at the first 5 records. And we can see that, yes, they all are prop 64. And then to finally sort of verify we're right, when we did our value counts before, you could see that there were 11 records for prop 64. And so if this process has succeeded, there should be 11 records now in our prop table. We can verify that using the technique we learned before, which is each data frame's info method. So prop.info, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, again the play button, and now we get the information about this filtered data frame. All the columns are exactly the same as before, but there's one key difference. Here in the row count, it tells us that there are only 11 entries. You should see that exact same number yourself, and if you do, congratulations, you've successfully filtered your data frame.